Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Understanding and Using Data to Increase Profits. My name is Holly Pels and I'm with Rick Software and will be your moderator for today's event. We have an exciting webinar ahead for you today featuring Rick Software's Jimmy Richburg and Potomac River Running's Ray Pugsley and Ryan Long. But before we get started, there's a few things I need to cover. Today's webinar will be recorded and will be made available to you after the event is over. For a better viewing experience, all lines are muted. If you have questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat box in your webinar control panel. Due to time constraints, we will answer all of your questions via email following the webinar. I believe that covers all of the details, so I'm going to pass it over to Jimmy to get us started. Jimmy?
Thank you, Holly. So as Holly said, my name is Jimmy Richburg, and I am the Client Success Director here at Rick Software. So my job is to oversee our technical support team and work across our account management team, our product team, and basically make sure that the system is up, working, and you guys are having the best, everyone is having the best experience possible. I will turn it over to Ray first so that he can introduce himself, and then Ryan following. So Ray?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Ray Pugsley, owner of Potomac River Running Store. Just a little brief information about me in the past. I went to Dartmouth as an undergraduate and ended up down at Johns Hopkins as a graduate student in hydrology. And somehow I went from geology and hydrology to selling running shoes. I'm sure a lot of you have similar tortured paths that got you to where you were. I ended up running with Reebok for about 10 years, running for the Reebok Enclave in I guess semi-professional status, and got to see a lot of the running industry through that angle as well. That's where I met my wife, and in 2003 put running on the back burner and decided to open up our running store, and that brings us to now. So I'll pass it back.
Hi everyone, I'm Ryan and I'm Ray's right-hand man. I handle all of the operations and buying for Potomac River, and I don't have quite the illustrious backstory that Ray does, but I love running and love running shoes and everything about the business, so it's kind of a perfect fit for me.
All right, thanks guys. So before we dive into the majority of the content for this, I'm just going to give a quick overview of Rick's and who we are for those who may not be familiar. So Rick's is a 34-year young technology company. We make, test, sell, support, and consult on all things Rick's here in-house in our office. And we're a cloud-based subscription service for North American footwear and apparel retail. And now I'll let Ray kind of talk a little bit about Potomac River.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we opened our first store in 2003. We actually opened 2 stores at the same time. My wife and I, my brother and sister-in-law, left the corporate world to pursue our passion, and decided with 2 families we should have 2 stores to get us to an income level that was sustainable sooner than later. So we opened up 2 stores in 2003, and then over the next 8 or 9 years, we expanded to 8 locations throughout Northern Virginia and DC. I think we've done a pretty good job, not only in growing, but putting on a good business. We've been in competitors' 50 Best Running Stores every year except one, and we're nominated for each Store of the Year the first year of that competition. And we not only have a focus with the retail component of things, but we put on a lot of training programs. That's one of the things we really have a lot of pride in, is our robust training programs business. But we also get involved with timing races and have about 25 of our own races that we time, and do the timing, contract timing for 100 or so others. So we try to be as involved in the community as I'm sure a lot of you all are as well. And we've learned a few things having 8 stores in a high rent district. We've had to learn to be efficient, and hopefully we can teach you some things today.
All right. Thank you, Ray. So just kind of a quick overview of the agenda of the topics we'll cover today. So we're going to start off by just taking a quick high-level look at the current state of the running industry. And then we'll move into talking about the importance of data and technology, both in general and inside of the space. And then talking about key data and reporting, and then finally finishing up with some reporting best practices. I'll share some of my thoughts as well as Ryan. So with that, we'll kind of dive right into the meat of the content here with the current state of the running industry. So what we're looking at here is a sample size of our overall run specialty population, and looking at kind of a 2015 to 2016 comparison in terms of units sold and dollars sold. So as we can see there, and from 2016 to 2015, the market is down a little bit from an overall perspective. We see the same type of trend happening in the footwear category, the apparel category, and the accessory category as well. So I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, but it's definitely a tough time in run specialty as well as in retail in general. 2017 has been a very interesting year in the retail space, with seeing a lot of bigger retailers close, and people adapting to new way of doing things. And one of the major changes that's occurring inside of the space in retail and in run specialty is the adaptation and the usage of both technology and using data to help make decisions and drive the business forward. So we see a lot of even bigger retailers starting to implement new technology features inside of the way they run their business, and data is kind of becoming the new currency of helping them run their business as efficiently as possible. And the more data they can get, the better they feel that they can run their business. And we're starting to see that that's essentially true. And having the access to data and having access to the technology to help you analyze the data and use it to make decisions is going to become even more increasingly important than it already has inside of retail and run specialty. Inside of the run specialty vertical, some of the bigger footwear brands are also kind of pushing their technology initiatives forward, making sure that they have all of what they need, and looking for more and more data to help them kind of drive the decisions on how do they want to sell in products. What type of product is going to be kind of like the next big hit for them, and really letting the data kind of be the storyteller and the driving force behind the next decisions that they're going to make. So, data has a lot of value inside of just making decisions and running the business, but just to call out a few things, when you're trying to forecast for your future buys and how you're going to perform throughout the year, looking at your performance so far this year and then previous years, and then also looking at profit information. Ultimately, are you making money on the product that you're selling? And then from a technology standpoint, looking at being able to compile all of your data, store it, analyze it, and then being able to report on it. So now that you have all this data, do you have a way that you can put it into a usable form to help you make decisions? So Ray, I'll turn it over to you to talk a little bit about how data and technology has impacted the way you guys do business at Potomac.
Sure, thank you. Let me start off by saying that I'm not sure who all is on the webinar to how many big stores, smaller stores, big market stores, small market stores, mid-market, hopefully a good spectrum. But I wanted to lead off by saying that even though we are a larger operation with 8 doors and have a fairly well-known brand, that we are not immune to the struggling retail side of things. That we have felt the pressure of the change in the running specialty environment just as much as anybody else is, and in many respects maybe even more so. In our area, rent is very high, and therefore as sales have tailed off, that rent pressure, that overhead pressure, immediately started to squeeze us. That was something that we needed to deal with right away. In order for us to stay in business, we had to learn how to truly run our business by the numbers and by the metrics, and it was do or die. If we didn't figure out how to be an efficient, well-run company, we were going to get overwhelmed by our overhead. So we, I don't want to today come off at all as preachy. We hope that not everybody has to get to the point where you're forced to learn a lesson. If you can learn a lesson ahead of time and implement it, you're going to be better off. we have specifically strengthened our business by being efficient and dialing in our inventory. We kind of flew by the seat of our pants, even though we had tools at our disposal. You know, in the first part of our, we're 14 years old. In the first 10 years, we had tools at our disposal. We didn't use them quite the right way because we didn't really have to, but now we do, and we've gotten very good at it. Hopefully, that this will be useful for everybody. Wix has been an essential piece in allowing us to do this. The power of Wix, really, to me, one of the biggest powers of Wix is in the reports. The reports can really dive down into your inventory and really show you how your business is doing and allow you to compare through time and see how you're improving. And when you start to do make changes that allow you to be more profitable on every sale every day, then that really changes your business and what you can do in terms of your how much disposable income you have and money to reinvest to keep things moving forward. I'm certainly really glad that we were forced to make these changes, because we've not just changed enough to hold the line, we've continued investigating and learning the power of the reports and the metrics so that we can continue to move forward. I'll like to point out the difference between the term easy and simple. It's not easy to really dial in your metrics and get everything in line, but it is simple. Once you learn how to do it, it's replicable and you can keep on track. But you do have to put the time in to learn what you have access to and what tools you can use. Another thing that I want to make sure that I like to spread the word on is we do a lot of data sharing. We share data with our vendor partners. And I encourage all of you to look at the vendors as willing partners rather than necessary partners. Through Rix, we have been able to share with the vendors our data, and they help us to be better. For those that don't know, you can set up API codes such that individual vendors can only see data that you want them to see about their own brand, but that can be really useful. I know that a lot of people are skeptical of really developing that close partnership, but we have done it. We jumped in with 2 feet, and it's been really great for us. For example, if we need to cut back on something, they know why, because they see our sales. They see that something's not moving, and they understand why we're making a big reduction in this SKU or that SKU. Another example, if we aren't selling something that's very popular elsewhere, then they can tell us, and we can investigate. Are we not selling that particular color of a shirt because it's not marketed correctly, it's not displayed correctly, or is it that our customer base just doesn't want it? We can that helps us look into why something's moving and isn't moving. I believe that we have a true partnership with our footwear and accessory vendors and apparel vendors as well, and it helps us in other ways as well. For example, product end of life. End of life is a problem for all of us. If we all do our part to order correctly, then we don't have old product, and then there's less product in the market to liquidate, and we all make more money. So if all of us could be better at ordering, our businesses would be more efficient, they'd be more profitable, and there wouldn't be this outside pressure when at the end of models when that product needs to be liquidated someplace somewhere. At this point, I'm going to pass it back to Jimmy, and eventually Ryan will go over exactly what reports we use to make ourselves more efficient and lean, and hopefully, as I said, you get something out of it that you can take back and help yourself become more profitable, and in turn make our whole channel as strong as it can be.
All right, thank you, Ray. That was great. So we'll keep on going here and start really to talk about the main topic of the conversation, which is the data. And as we have this conversation, it's very easy to kind of be a little bit overwhelmed. As Ray said, they kind of jumped in with 2 feet and figured it out from there. So what we wanted to do here is really focus on a few distinct data points and really kind of practical applications of how you can use them to not only gauge the performance of your suppliers, but also the products within each of those suppliers, and allow you to make decisions on what's working, what isn't, what can you do to improve on these metrics, and how can you use it to help you plan for your current in-season sales and also what is coming next. So the three metrics that we're going to focus on today, and we'll refer to them as key performance indicators or KPIs, are gross profit, GMROI or gross margin return on investment, and turns. So we'll start by going through gross profit, which is a metric that mostly everyone is familiar with, and essentially it's just your profit as a percentage of your total sales, and it's calculated based off of your profit dollars over your overall sales dollars. With there being essentially two ways that you can improve on this metric. The first is to reduce the amount of markdowns that you have over a given time period when you're evaluating your sales. And the second would be to sell a higher volume of higher margin products. So the more product you have, the bigger margin that you're selling, the better you're going to increase your overall profit number and then drive up your gross profit percentage. Second metric is turns. So turns is the number of times you're going to sell through your entire inventory in a 1-year time span, and it's calculated by looking at your cost of goods sold over your average inventory cost for the time period that you're analyzing. So improving turns, another one where there are two ways that you can do that. The first of which is to reduce your overall inventory cost. So lowering the amount of inventory is going to increase the amount of times that you will turn through that inventory over the course of the year. And then also increasing your sales volume will also in turn reduce the amount of your inventory and then increase the turn number. This is one metric where whatever that number is really depends on how you choose to kind of run your business and keep your inventory. So there are many retailers who like to keep their inventory very lean and are constantly refreshing product on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis. So they tend to have very high turn numbers versus others who like to keep it at about a 90-day turn rate, so turning about 4 times a year, because it'll match with most turns that the vendors will set for any of your buys. So you get it in, and then ideally you can turn that inventory over within 90 days, and then pay off that that particular buy. And then finally is GMROI, or like gross margin return on investment. So in my opinion, this is one of the most important metrics that you could look at because it takes into account both your profitability and your inventory cost. And this is for every dollar that you invested in a product, how many are you getting in return? So looking at, again, profit over inventory and accounting for both of those things can give you a really good idea of the health of your business, of suppliers, of products, and can point you in a very good direction of what you need to do in order to improve the performance of of those products or of those suppliers. So keeping those three metrics in mind, we're going to talk about them from kind of a more real world practical standpoint. And then as I go through and talk about some of this, like as Ray said, I'll turn it over to Ryan so they can talk about how they're using it inside of their business. But so we'll kind of look at this from a standpoint of vendor performance. So we have kind of some results from vendor sales over a specific time period. And in this case, we're going to focus specifically on Brooks and New Balance, which were the top two vendors based on units and dollars. So as you can see, looking at here, we have Brooks as the top performing vendor if you're looking at specifically at the number of units and the number of dollars sold over New Balance. But when we move over and take a look at our gross profit and GMROI numbers, for example, we can see that New Balance actually had a higher gross profit percentage and a higher GMROI value than Brooks. So while Brooks may have sold more units and may have brought in more dollars, New Balance actually performed better on some of these other key performance indicators. So one of the things to kind of take away here is, looking at just the number of units and the total sales dollars is not the only way to gauge the success of a vendor. You want to obviously sell through their product, but you also want to make sure that what you're selling is performing and giving you the best return. So you can see, in this particular situation, New Balance was providing a better return overall than Brooks was. And as we look, at the two numbers, one of the things we can attribute to that is the markdown percentage when comparing the two brands. So Brooks obviously had a higher markdown percentage than that of New Balance, and given that profit is one of the variables included in both gross profit percentage and in the GMROI value, anything that's going to bring the profit number down is ultimately going to drive those numbers down as well. So I can look to see, okay, Brooks underperformed against New Balance in these two categories, and now I know why, because I had a higher number of markdowns when it came to my Brooks products. And then once you are able to identify that, the next question is, okay, now that I've identified that, what do I do with that information? And that's when we'll dive in and start talking more about the product performance and how to basically take that information that you've learned about your suppliers and see what exactly is affecting it the most. So we'll look at a few of the products here and see how they were impacting those performance metrics for Brooks. So the first one is going to be the Women's Ravenna 6. So obviously you can also see on here with the Women's Ravenna 7. So this is post the update of that particular shoe. And in this we have a markdown percentage of 24.5. So that obviously had a big impact in driving down the gross profit of that product, as you see, to 33.7, and then ultimately driving down the profitability of Brooks as a whole. Second one we'll look at here is the Men's Adrenaline 15. So we kind of see the same thing, a very high markdown percentage, resulting in a much lower than expected gross profit percentage, ultimately also contributing to the lower gross profit of the Brooks supplier. And then also the Men's Ravenna 6. So again, we see a very high markdown percentage leading to a very low gross profit percentage. So now that we started by basically looking at our suppliers and seeing how they performed. And then when we realized that Brooks had some other metrics that were underperforming in comparison to New Balance, we looked to see what exactly about that metric is being impacted. So in this case, it was the profit percentage based and being driven down by markdowns. And then we took it a level down deeper to look at the products that Brooks was selling to see which specific products were experiencing the greatest markdown. So once you have that information, you can kind of, as you're looking forward and you're making buys in the future, decide on the plan, how can you reduce the inventory of some of those older styles so you're not left with those styles after a product updates, and ultimately you end up having to sell at a much greater markdown, reducing your overall profitability for that particular brand, that particular product. And that'll kind of lead us nicely into the concept of a product exit strategy. So as Ray mentioned as he was talking, this is definitely a pretty challenging thing. And if you're not managing product toward the end of the life cycle, you can end up with a lot of excess inventory for an item when it updates. And in that case, in order to remove the rest of that inventory, you need to mark it down heavily, which is ultimately going to affect your profitability for that brand, for the store, driving down the money that you're getting back for your investment on your inventory. So in this case, we're gonna take a look at a real world example. So this is from a store that was about a mid-volume size store compared to the rest of the market, and we're looking at the Brooks Adrenaline 15 for men updating into the Adrenaline 16. So for this particular store, the Brooks Men's Adrenaline 15 averaged 40 pairs per month for the 12-month life cycle at an average of a 45% margin. So the margin was right where you'd expect it to be, and kind of consistently selling through their inventory as they went through the year. So on October 1st, 2015, which was 1 year prior to the update of the Adrenaline, they had 70 pairs on hand. During the month of October, they received an additional 15 pairs. So, before that was even received, it should have been, had they been analyzing and looking at data, the first thing they should have noticed is we already have more on hand right now than we've sold on average throughout the month throughout this year. So there really wasn't a need to bring in any additional inventory. And then on the first, the Adrenaline 15 updated to the 16. And on that same day, there were 45 pairs of the 15 left on hand. So had they not brought in any, those additional 15 pairs, they would have been close to being, out of stock for the 15 and just being able to focus all of their selling efforts on the 16. So after the Adrenaline updated to the 16, the time to sell through the remaining pairs of the men's 15 was 11 months. So almost a full life cycle of the next model number to sell through the old one before they could completely get out of that inventory. And over that time period, the average margin for the shoe was 22%. So looking back when the shoe was in season, when they averaged 45% margin per month, they cut that in half over an 11-month period to get rid of the rest of that inventory. So this just speaks to the importance of being able to understand, what the data is telling you about your product and how you can use that information to help you plan in the future. So obviously you want to have as little inventory of an old style as possible so that when you update to the new one, you're not having to drastically mark down product in order to get it out the door, and then you can focus your efforts and the efforts of your staff selling the product on the newest model where you're going to get your best return. So then for this section, we're going to kind of dive into a different way of thinking about analyzing data. So talking just sales analysis in general, and then a concept that many of you may be familiar with and may have heard of, which is utilizing pivot tables. So when doing an analysis on your sales, looking at some of the reports we have, based out of RICS, including best and worst sellers, the sales analysis, and the stock status. And one of the kind of nice things about each of these reports is they all come in a CSV Excel format, which makes it very easy to do some additional data analysis for some deeper dives, which will kind of take us into the concept of pivot tables. So pivot tables, I'm not going to get too into the weeds on this, but I want to kind of introduce the concept, and then if you have additional questions about this, please feel free to reach out after the webinar. But essentially, this will allow you to create multiple different views of your data just from a single data set. So, being able to understand and use pivot tables can help you look at your data in very different ways and make it a lot more efficient. So instead of needing to run maybe 10 reports to see what you need, you can run a single data set and be able to look at it in multiple different ways. So here's just kind of a quick snapshot of a way you can set this up. So what I'm looking at each of my SKUs, and I'm looking at the overall performance of those SKUs over a specific time period. So I have my number of units, net sales, I have my profitability, my profit percentage, ROI or GMROI, my turns, and my on-hand units. And then I've included slicers so I can easily just narrow down my data into accessories, apparel, or footwear, any of my major categories. And then if I want to look at a particular supplier inside of one of those categories. So from a single data set, I have many different viewpoints where I can analyze my data and help me make decisions without the need for having multiple reports and having to switch back and forth. And now what I'd like to do is turn it over to Ryan so he can kind of add his perspective on how they utilize data and help them make decisions inside of their store. So Ryan?
Thanks, Jimmy. So the whole idea behind running reports is to see areas where you can make your company strong and more profitable. It's always fun to look at the numbers after that busy Saturday and see how much you sold, but if you're not making the data work for you, then there's no use in running reports and looking at metrics. Being able to determine actionable changes and improvements is the goal of any data analysis. So an excellent example of putting your data to work is by creating an open-to-buy plan. Open-to-buy is just a fancy way of saying a budget. So a good open-to-buy plan starts with just that. It's a plan. This is the most crucial part of buying and business planning position. A lot of people like to call themselves buyers, but the actual buying of the product is often the least impactful part of the job. It's very easy to say you'd like to sell 20% more socks or sell more New Balance 860s, but have you actually ordered the appropriate amount of product to make that happen? And if you're selling more 860s, then what are you selling less of? So simply put, if you sold 1,000 shoes last year and realistically you expect your business to be flat this year, then you can't buy more shoes than it's going to take to sell 1,000 pairs. So we're right in the middle of sell-in season now, and before I meet with any vendors, I'll create an open-to-buy for the entire season based on our cost of goods sold during the past year. I'll also take into account the last 2 months of sales data to identify if a brand is trending up or down at the sales floor level. Additionally, I'll consider how profitable a brand has been for us based on our terms, our shipping cost, ease of doing business, and the markdown percentage that Jimmy was just touching on. It's common sense that investing in brands that are most profitable for you is a key part of staying in business, but you have to be able to identify what those brands are and what those products are and invest accordingly. It doesn't do you any good to sell $1 million worth of product if it costs you $1.2 million to sell it. And so that's exactly why GMROI is the single most important metric to evaluate the health of inventory and sales. A GMROI value of over 3.5 for footwear is where you want to shoot. If your gym ROI on a particular brand or product falls below 2, then you need to seriously evaluate why you're spending your money there. And the reason this needs to be so high is you're not only covering the cost of your goods, but you need to be able to pay your rent, your staff, and electricity bill, all those things that add up. So you need to be turning that product over quicker than what you're paying for it. And if a turn rate for a brand is falling below a desired rate, I know I need to adjust the budget down. Likewise, if a brand was turning too high, I know there's probably some areas we missed opportunities and we can expand the budget. So Jimmy touched on it earlier, but it's ideal to have your turns line up with your dating. So 90-day dating means you need to turn over your product 4 times a year. So once the big picture plan has been mapped out, you can identify each brand's open to buy at the model level, and you base that on the strength of the shoe update and how the model's trending and the turn rate on that given shoe, and you want to break that down by sales based on gender as well. And that's the time when you can evaluate if that particular vendor made a great update, really improved the color or the fit of the shoe, but it really needs to be based on data. So if you find a particular model isn't turning as high as you'd like, so you need to tighten the size run, maybe you need to only carry one width in the shoe, or maybe you don't even need to carry that model. You have something else on the shoe wall that will fit that customer's needs. The key is to always stay within the overall budget, because unless your business is growing by 10%, it's not realistic to forecast every footwear brand to be up 10%. Does no one any favors, most especially the store owners, to overbuy and cancel off orders or have to liquidate product at the end of the life cycle. So Jimmy, I'll turn it back over to you. I know you've got some things you want to touch on.
Thanks, Ryan. So we'll kind of wrap up here on the topic, just talking about some reporting best practices. And the first thing I'll touch on is just to kind of summarize the concept that we went through. So first, by starting off by looking at a top level and looking at your top and bottom suppliers based on some of those KPIs. And then once you've identified, who those top and bottom suppliers are, diving down a level deeper and looking at the top and bottom performing products inside of each of those suppliers. So you can determine what is driving the success of that supplier and what is bringing that supplier down, and how can you make adjustments to help improve the overall performance. And ultimately what you want to do is you want to create a plan to continue to improve the product performance based on those KPIs. So as Ryan said, having open to buy is a great way to go about doing that. You never want to just kind of order on a whim and order what you think. You want to really have a plan around it and know if you want to grow 10%, if you want to grow 15%, what do you need to have in inventory in order to do that? What do you need to sell in order to achieve that? And finally, just kind of from our best practice guide, looking at just a schedule of reports and how you can look at things. So looking at your sales by SKU on a daily level to kind of get an idea of what's happening, on the sales floor on a daily basis. Weekly, analyzing by class or supplier, doing sales comparison and the stock status to kind of see where your inventory is and how you can fill in. And then monthly, doing best sellers and sales comparison for each of your major brands, the store, and with classes, so you can see how are things performing inside of each of those areas and how are they performing in comparison to last year. So just to kind of recap some of the topics we talked about today, we started by talking about the current state of the running industry, and then we moved into talking about the importance of data and technology, both from my perspective as well as from Ray and Potomac. And then we talked about some key data and reports and how to put some practical implications of using that data. And then Ryan shared the same, and then covered a few reporting best practices of how can you kind of start this process of how do you start looking, where do you start looking at your data, what data do you look at, ultimately how can you use that to help you make decisions and help you increase the profitability in your store.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was great. We want to take a quick second to thank Ryan and Ray. They put a lot of work to help us with this webinar, and we are incredibly grateful to them for participating today. As I mentioned earlier, we will be answering all of the questions that you entered into the chat box via email following this webinar. So also feel free to take down Jimmy's email and send additional questions his way. We also have recorded the webinar, so be sure to look for that in your inbox in the next couple of days so you can kind of go back to the slides and review the information. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you guys have a great day.